Vegapunk's words. Video will one day connect the entire world. It will mean knowing, and the discomfort of being known.
Can you all hear me? Hello? This is Vegapunk. Hello, world. Come in, world. Let's get this message started. I have committed 2 sins, therefore, whether I am arrested or executed, I shall program this message to be broadcast when my heart stops beating. However, I want to make one thing very clear first. Whoever may have rendered their judgment unto me, I am not trying to convince you that their intent is evil. I will not apply the labels of good and evil at all, in fact, because I too understand too little about him to begin with. What I am about to tell you is so preposterous, you might even burst into laughter. However, you all have a right to know. To make a long story short, the world as we know it will sink into the sea. Now, speaking of the near future for me, assuming that the sensors I built are functioning correctly, in the days after I record this message, there should be a most remarkable earthquake that strikes the entire planet. As a result of that, the sea should rise about 1 meter around the world, rendering some islands uninhabitable. Beaches around the world will be lost for good. If I am wrong in this prediction, feel free to disregard the rest of this message. If this has happened, however, you should heed my words very carefully. This particular earthquake is not what I would call a natural phenomenon. In my own way, I only ever hoped for peace. But this was the root of my first sin. I dreamt of a source of endless eternal energy, and in my desire to push the world forward into the future, I flew too close to the sun. Allow me to explain just what it is that is happening to our world. From about 900 years ago to 800 years ago, a period of a century, there is a span of history that is entirely blank. We call this the void century, because all records from this time were eliminated. The only means to know this lost piece of history is to find a message from the past in the form of poneglyphs scattered across the world and decipher its contents. However, the world government has made it a crime of the highest order to decipher the message of the poneglyphs. And despite being a member of the government myself, I broke this law that was my second sin. Through the sheer tenacity of a group of excellent archaeologists, I inherited some texts and a number of poneglyphs, which I have deciphered and continued studying to the best of my ability. I regret none of this. History, you see, tells a story. In other words, what I know is an incomplete story of that 100-year void. It would be dishonest to fill in the blanks with my own speculation, so I will leave you only with the verified truth. The main character of the story was born into a kingdom with an impossibly advanced civilization 900 years ago. Like the sun god Nika spoken of in Elbaf legend, he fought with a body that stretched and contracted. His name was Joy Boy, and he was the first man on this sea to be called a pirate. But as for why he was called a pirate, I have only read were from a handful of poneglyphs, but what I found there was the record of a breathtakingly vast war. Joy Boy's enemy was the world government of the present day. More accurately, it was the precursor to the world government, a provisional army put together by 20 kingdoms known as the Alliance. You might say they had no other choice, so robust was Joy Boy's faction. Without knowing the Spock that caused the war, I won't say who was right or wrong. I'll simply state that 2 competing ideologies came head to head. As I mentioned earlier, for its time, 900 years ago, the country of Joy Boy's birth was a startlingly advanced civilization, and the weapons that were used over the course of this 100-year conflict appeared to be impossible to recreate with the latest of modern science. Even I, A humble genius cannot replicate them, and therein lies the problem. The Void Century night came to a close with the defeat of Joy Boy, but not before, leaving vast permanent scars of war across the face of the world. The world is made up of a series of islands. Sailing between them is difficult, and many people never experience anything but their own culture at home. But this shared understanding of the world does not necessarily apply to the world of 1,000 years ago, because a cataclysm occurred during the Void Century, causing the world to sink once before. We are currently living on the pieces of a continent that existed long ago. The world of a millennium ago now slumbers, unseen at the bottom of the sea. In fact, one can assume that in the past, there were a number of continents we know nothing about. If the world were still the same as it was in the past, then the act of erasing 100 years of history would be simply unthinkable and impossible. However, it makes much more sense when you understand that the rise in sea level over that century was 200 meters. As for why the sea level rose so much during the century, it would be natural to assume the work of a sudden natural disaster. But I can state for a fact that this was a man-made disaster. If such a cataclysm were caused by natural forces, then the initial disaster would have spanned several centuries and inflicted slow but continual damage upon the world. But by any measurement, climatology, geology, environmental and atmosphere science, this dramatic shift could not have happened within a single century. So the cause is something else. And when I detected the rise in the worldwide sea level the other day, I had my answer. I knew the cause and confirmed its existence. The ancient weapons that sank the world into the sea 800 years ago still exist today and await the moment they stir once again. In other words, the vast war that arose during the Void Century never came to an end.